Hello, hello. This is our first time that we have recorded together in person in a while.
You're right. I forgot about that. It's been a while.
It's been a little bit. So Today's episode, we are going to discuss making big decisions and also experiencing big changes in our life and how we navigate that with the people around us, and really kind of how when someone else in our life makes a decision that affects us, how we respond to that and how we can be supportive, but also mindful of what we're going to do and how it affects them.
Yeah, no, I love this topic because, Cristie, you've just went through a big change, had to make a big decision. And I think all of our listeners are going to feel the same way. Like at some point in your life, you had to make a big decision, whether it was career, personal. And sometimes we had to respond to things that happened to us that were life-altering changes, and how the people around us had to adjust to it, but also how we respond to it. So I love that. But can we just dive in?
Yeah. So I know we both probably have areas in our lives over all of the decades that we have experienced life changes. And, you know, I had a big one recently that I've actually labeled probably one of the toughest decisions I've made in my career.
Yeah.
And it was, not only did I feel so debilitated in certain points of that process, but it impacted me emotionally, physically, mentally. And yet, you know, we have to do them. There was a point where I had to really focus on myself and what I was going to do and what that was going to look like. But the process through it was really challenging because I kept focusing on everybody else.
Yeah.
And so I would lose myself for most of the time. I think, you know, I want to say making this decision, and it was a career change for me.
Yeah, I was going to say, let's just lay the groundwork a little bit for our listeners, because you just were offered an incredible opportunity, and you weren't looking for an opportunity, but it just kind of came to you, landed because of everything you have done. And so then all of a sudden comes the turmoil, right?
Right.
You get offered this opportunity. And then for you, the process, what happened because it was such an opportunity of, we are all presented sometimes opportunities where it's hard to say no, but then you're like, so then what happened? When you got this opportunity, you realize, okay, this is a really incredible thing. What happened to you?
So, and I say, but because you really want, you know, I wish we could just say we're going to focus on this positive piece and we're looking at the opportunity and how great it is for us. But the reality is, for some of us, not all of us, but for some of us, I was looking at how many people around me were going to be affected by that decision, and if I was going to choose and take this opportunity. And it was, you know, weeks of me processing all the people that would feel abandoned, neglected, that would feel like I hadn't considered the effects that it would have on them. Friendships, long friendships of people that have supported me and loved me through tough times in my life, that were going to feel like I had walked out on them. And so I was in turmoil, and it was difficult gathering all of the pieces to help me come up with a solution of what direction I was going to go and feel like I was balancing that. And some people say, you know, you write down the pros and you write down the cons of what this looks like. And of course I did that. You know, I put it all on paper probably 50 times. I journaled, I meditated, I did all of it. And at the end of the day, which was a really difficult place for me to be, because I think I'm the type of person, but I know when it comes to making decisions, I really bring everybody else into that process. I consider how it's going to impact everybody around me. And I think that's a beautiful thing. I think that's something about me that I cherish and I value. And at the same time, I'm realizing that at the end of the day, I really have to make decisions that are around me personally.
For sure. Yeah.
And that could be, you know, some people could interpret that as being selfish and not considering everyone else. But I think we have to find a balance, and I'm learning that, and I'm not good at it. I tend to put it around everyone else versus my own personal needs.
Well, I want to interject in the sense of just going through the journey with you a little bit, on the sidelines of, I will say, I don't know anybody who has been more methodical and more careful and cautious. And I know for a fact, you took it so seriously and gave it so much thought. And I do agree. Everybody's different in making a big decision. And this is a career move, right? So some people may look at it as like, well, it's a career move. It's business, right? You've got to keep it professional. Keep it professional. And I agree with that. I think there's a point of that. And we all process things differently. That being said, there is a point, and I stand firm in this, and I believe this of all people. At the end of the day, nobody has walked in your shoes to get where you are, and nobody has to walk in your shoes to get where you're going. It's all on you. At the end of the day, it's all on you, and it's you and your family. And I believe everybody has to do what is best. And I can be on the outside and completely 100% disagree with your decision, but it's not my life and it's not my family. You know what I mean? And I think it's having the compassion. So we want to get into you making a decision.
Right. But I want to kind of talk to what you just said. You have learned and acknowledged that other people are going to make decisions. And we personally, if we're being affected by it.
Yes.
How do we respond to that? And I'll say, I thought about that when I was in the process of deciding which direction I was going to go. And I evaluated all the people it would affect and how they would react to that decision. And I knew that I was going to be taking a big risk and that I would probably lose some friendships. And I would probably, unfortunately, have people create their own story around it. And my reputation would possibly be compromised. And so that was a tough one for me too, because I feel like in my career, it's been so important for me. I've spent years building the reputation I have professionally. And so it means so much to me. And I knew there was going to be some people that would create their own story around it and that would affect me. And so knowing that was a very painful part of accepting that I would have to let that go at some point, and I would have to be okay with making the decision and knowing that I was probably going to lose some relationships with that choice. But then being able to, in the same time, accept that that's okay. And that sometimes relationships have to come to an end and they have their season. And even though it's so painful to acknowledge that, I knew that this was still the next step in my journey. And that I had to be okay with that.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's anytime you make a big decision, career or personal, sometimes it kind of falls in the same as sometimes people get divorced and maybe it's a choice they get divorced, but you might have family and friends that I think the true identity comes out, or the true relationship comes out of, you think, even in career wise, it affects somebody. So in your example, somebody may be really sad or disappointed, because it does affect them.
Right.
They may love working with you, or you're kind of, maybe they've leaned on you and now they're like, well, who am I going to lean on? Or you were just a constant, or whatever, for whatever reason. Right. And I think it's okay for people to, you said it best. We don't know how people are going to respond, even though you were preparing,
trying to prepare for it.
But I'm sure you were surprised by some of the responses. I'm sure. I mean, you really find out who is there. And I think that we were talking earlier before we started recording, I think it's okay for people to have a knee-jerk reaction or a response at the moment. They're going to feel sad, or they're going to be mad. They're going to react. But then it's really sitting back. And if you can be mature about it, look at it, you always want to be supportive of, okay, this is, the friendship means more than this, or how am I showing up for them?
Correct.
And we can't worry about that, because at the end of the day, you still have to, you made a decision. You have to know there's going to be fallout, and you're going to lose some things that maybe really meant a lot to you, but you have no control over.
That's the big piece is we all want to control the outcome, and we make decisions based on that because we're trying to prevent the fear we have of things going bad. And really going through the process, it's only been, I think it's only been like 30 days since I actually made the decision to leave my partner of 12 years. And my team that had supported, loved me, were loyal to me. And that's been an emotional roller coaster. And I, was so grateful for so many of them that stood by that decision and reached out and shared their love and shared their support. Yeah. And that was helpful for me to be okay with what I had done. And I was okay with my decision, but I was still in that turmoil of it. But there were others that could not see it, and they had their own narrative, and that they continue to, believe and share, and that's okay. Yeah. And, it really, I hope, as we're, talking through this, for people to see that, why is it when someone that is in our circle, in our family or our friend life, when they make a tough decision or career, all of the things, when they make a decision to do something and we are impacted by it, to your point of, yes, we're going to have emotions around it, but why is it that we ourselves focus on how their decision affected us? And is that what we should be doing? Can we take a moment, like you said, acknowledge our sadness, our disappointment, our frustration, but at the end of the day, this is our life, our journey to navigate, and it's not dependent on that person that made a decision that affected us. Does that make sense?
No, 100%. But here's what I'm saying. I'm not saying, I think it's entitled to have their reactions. And I think you're so right. How they choose to continue to react to it is all on them. That's the frustrating part, right? I think you're saying take ownership. What you're saying is everybody should take ownership, because how are we, right? If I'm going to be bitter, but that's my problem. If I choose to be bitter because somebody made a decision I didn't like, I totally know what you're saying, but it's all about taking ownership. Is it healthy for us to harbor resentment? In divorces, friendships change because the couple now is no longer a couple. It may be couple friends. It may be friends you had from prior, and it may be affected. And then you find out, oh, wow, they're not really friends anymore because they either went with the other spouse or they're not with either of us. And I think there's hurt, but that is a choice. Whoever's making a decision has to know, like you said, you had to prepare, unfortunately, the fallout. But I agree with you. I don't think, and that's a choice you make as a person. You would never do that. You would never be that person. You might feel sad or mad or angry or something, but at the end of the day, you would sit back and go, oh, I love this person. Okay, I don't like it for me, but I really wish you the best. So it really says a lot about somebody when that happens. And we've all had it. I'm sure our listeners have had that all happen in some part of their life where you're going, wow, I had no idea. Like, I thought they would understand or support me, and they didn't. And so it hurts. It's like that. But I think all we can control is we choose to not be those type of people. Does that make sense?
Well, yeah. And I really want to leave with our listeners. Look at where you have spent your life and had experiences where someone else has done something, chose to do something, good or bad, and look at how you've been able to show up for yourself, as opposed to maybe taking a victim role of how that affected you.
Victim role, yeah.
Of how that affected you. Yeah. And I know we're human and we're going to. And so I think what you said is so important to remember. We can have the emotions around it. We can. We should. Yeah. We feel them. We go through it. But then how do we show up for ourselves? Because the reality is it's up to us.
100%.
Not the people around us that have to continue to live their lives. And we have to remove ourselves from thinking that we are affected by that. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Oh, you said it. That's perfect. Because what I love about it is we're all responsible for our own happiness. We're all responsible for our own success, really. I mean, at the end of the day, yeah, you may do things as a team, you may do things, but ultimately you have to be the one who shows up every day. That's what I was saying. Nobody has to walk in our shoes. And it's so hard I coming at it from both sides. I have made career changes that I was surprised at reactions. I was surprised, and it is hard. I mean, I think our industry, it might be, maybe it's a little bit heightened because people move and make changes. And I'm sure other industries might feel the same. I don't know. I don't know enough. Or if it's just more matter of fact and more business. Do you know what I mean? Where in our industry, we definitely have a lot of emotion around it.
Well, that's because we're such a relationship industry.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a really good point.
Our entire success in career is based around building relationships. And so we get so invested in them.
Yeah.
And, I look at the team that I have worked alongside for the past 10 years, and they're my family. They're my family. They're my friends. They've been through so much with me. Yeah. And so to even think that I would ever have left and done something different was beyond anything I could have imagined. And yet it happened, and I had to go through that process. And I still love all of them and respect them all, and am grateful for everything that we created and built together. And I, pray that they will continue, as I know they will, because they're all amazing in their own rights, and they are going to be okay. And I'm going to be okay. And so at the end of the day, I think my lesson through all of that was that I had to really work on thinking about me. And it was a hard thing to do because I am used to thinking about everybody else. Yeah. And so when it came down to it, I took everybody out of the equation and I focused on how it was going to affect me personally. Yeah. And that's what ultimately drove my decision.
No, I think Cristie, I think it's so hard because people I'm sure every single one of our listeners has had to make a really tough decision in their life at some point, if not multiple times. And it's not easy. And I think the steps I would love to hear from listeners or hear from people, their process of how they get to that end game where they know they've made the right decision. They know it's right, but they're getting a lot of backlash, or they're getting a lot of resentment or anger, or people coming at them. How do they handle that process? And I'm a really big believer that when you do the right thing for you and your family, at the end of the day, everything will work out, and we're going to learn lessons from it. And sometimes it's really hard because somebody you thought would always be your supporter ends up not being your supporter, or a friendship. Do you know what I mean? There's so many things, and you go, wow, okay, that hurt. How do I move on from that? How do you move on from that?
Well, and you also, most often when we look back at those painful changes or experiences, and we've been removed far enough from it, whether it's a year, 2 years, 3 years, most often we will look back and we will be able to say with conviction, okay, wow, that played out how it was supposed to play out. Yeah. Or I could not imagine at the time that it would look like this today because I was in it. I was in the depths of it. But now I can honestly look back and go, I made the right decision. And the reality is every decision we make is the right decision. It's just a decision. There's no right or wrong. It's just a decision. And then we have to figure out how we're going to work through that decision and learn from it and grow from it.
Oh, I love that. You said it great. I was listening to Brené Brown yesterday, and it all comes back to being authentic and being vulnerable and being real and really sticking to who you are and what you want. And it doesn't mean, she always does a quote from Teddy Roosevelt. It's the man in the arena. If you're not willing to show up and play, there's a lot of people, a lot of critics. So it reminds me of that quote. If you're not willing to get in the arena, get muddy, get bloody and sweaty, then do you really have the right to criticize? And I think that is huge. So remember that. She had to remember that I'm not going to take that criticism from somebody who's not willing to show up. And you chose to show up in your life. You chose to show up. We all do when we're making these hard decisions. And you have to honor that and respect it too. You may not like a decision somebody makes, but you have to respect the fact that they made a decision, right? Good or bad, whether I like it or not. So I think the message today is, how do you mentally and emotionally really get through a tough decision? Do people I mean, do we have a system? Do you have a system? Do you have a process? What did you learn? What are the biggest takeaways? Give me 3 takeaways of what you learned when facing a really big decision in your life.
So for me, this one was like I said, it was one of the bigger decisions in my career, one of the toughest. And so I brought in people that I respected to help me talk through a lot of the areas that I was struggling with.
Yeah.
So I felt like having an outside perspective was really important because I was so in my head.
Yeah.
And then I also did a lot of journaling because the journaling piece allowed me to get a lot of the things outside of my head, but allowed me to process the emotions I was feeling. And the last piece was I had a coach that spent a lot of time with me working through all of my what's the word? So bear with me here.
Just process or
all of the areas that have blocked me in my life regarding how I make decisions. And so I had a coach that really dove into why I was having such a hard time with this decision.
Yeah.
And she really pulled out kind of like almost like that fear that I make decisions out of the fear of who I'm going to hurt. And so she was really able to remind me that I was allowed to make a decision for myself and remind myself that they are all responsible for themselves.
Yeah.
And they are all on their own journey and I cannot control that. And that took a lot of work for me to remember that this was about me and not everybody else. And so she worked with me through that. And that is where I was finally able to be more comfortable with what this was going to look like.
Yeah.
So I brought in outside people that I respected, highly respected their perspective, journaling. I did do the listing. I wrote all the pros and cons for both sides. And then my coach that really helped me dig deep.
Yeah. You know what, Cristie, I love that. And I think the power of that is the very first is identifying how you make decisions. I mean, I think a life coach, or you can read books, there's a lot of information out there because that's really digging deep in the first place of how do you make decisions? Do you know? Do you react? Are you a knee-jerk reaction and make a decision? Do you make a decision based on when you're in a good place? Have you looked at all the facts? I really love that process, but that was kind of your first really is identifying that. Once you knew that, then you had 1, 2, 3 in place.
Yeah.
So I love that. Anything else you would add in making a big decision? I have a couple of thoughts on how I approach it, but
Sure.
we have made so many big decisions in our life. And I think the first thing is when a big decision comes, I do the same thing. It's sitting down. I've never analyzed how do I make decisions because I've always just taken the decision. It may be an opportunity. I always just get, for me, I pray a lot. I think a lot. I internalize a lot. And I have to have a process. I have to really think through. I've somewhat written down pros and cons, but really it's just, what's the benefit? What's the negative? I am somebody who goes with my gut a lot. And I'm not saying that's necessarily the right thing, but for me, it's worked my whole life.
It's your inner knowing.
It's my inner, I trust, and I'm learning to trust it more and more. But there are times when I just know in the big picture, this is the right decision. I just go with my gut. So I think a lot of people have that sense, and that will be divorce. That will be a friendship. And I know there's going to be fallout, or I know, and I may not always, I expect it. I wouldn't say I know. I just expect it. And every single time, to what you said earlier, long-term looking back, it was always the right decision. And not that it was easy. Sometimes it was really, really hard. But if you're true to yourself, and true to you're the only one that gets to walk the life, right?
Right.
Nobody's gonna live my life in the future. Nobody's gonna take care of me the way I can take care of me. So at the end of the day, I think it's being true to yourself. For me, a gut feeling is really important. But I love the learning. How do you make decisions, and can you make decisions better? Like it sounds like you learned a lot from that.
And the toughest decisions that we can look back on were probably where we grew the most.
100%. Yeah. Yeah. I don't think you're growing unless you're struggling. I mean, through adversity is growth. So yeah, I totally agree with that.
So we hope that you loved this topic. We would love to hear from you. Reach out to us on our social media Instagram pages and share with us how a tough decision has impacted your life and the people around you.
Yes. Thanks for joining us.